There is a secret Florence Scovel Shinn used to pay her bills when she had no money at all. None. And tonight I am going to show you that secret, and show you that it is not some strange invention. It is written right there in your Bible. So let us go straight to it, because the whole method rests on a story. In the 4th chapter of 2nd Kings, there was a widow, and her husband had died, and she was drowning in debt, and the creditors were coming to take her 2 sons as slaves to pay what she owed. She had nothing at all, except 1 small jar of oil, and she came to the prophet Elisha in desperation, and he asked her, "What do you have in your house?" And she said, "Nothing, except a jar of oil." And he told her to go and borrow empty vessels from all her neighbors, as many as she could gather, and not just a few, and then to go inside, shut the door, and pour her little jar of oil into the empty vessels. And she did, and the oil kept flowing and flowing, filling vessel after vessel, jar after jar, until every single container she had gathered was full. And only then did the oil stop, and she sold the oil, and paid all her debts, and lived on the rest. Read that again. She had nothing but a little oil, and she paid every debt and had money left over. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this story is not just history, it is a spiritual formula, a demonstration of the exact law you can use when you have no money and bills are staring you in the face. She taught that your supply does not come from what you can see in your hand. It comes from an invisible, infinite source, and that source can multiply the little you have until it covers everything you owe and more. And I want you to notice every detail of this story, because Florence taught that the scriptures are spiritual textbooks, and that every detail carries meaning. Notice first that the widow was in a hopeless situation by every human measure. Her provider was gone, her debts were crushing, and the consequence of not paying was the loss of her own children. This was not a minor inconvenience. This was total desperation, the kind of situation where the human mind sees absolutely no way out. And that is precisely the situation in which this law shines brightest. Notice second, that the prophet did not give her money. He did not solve it for her. He gave her a spiritual formula and required her to act on it in faith. Notice third, that the miracle used what she already had, the humble jar of oil. Notice fourth, that it required her participation, gathering vessels, pouring, selling. Notice fifth, that the supply was abundant, not merely enough to pay the debt, but enough to live on afterward. This is the divine pattern. God does not deal in barely enough. The widow was left with a surplus, and Florence taught that this is always the divine intention, not mere survival but overflow. So as you hold this story, see that it is a complete map, a situation of total lack, transformed into abundance through spiritual law and faithful action, and know that the same map applies to you. Whatever bills are staring you down tonight, most people, when the bills pile up and the money is not there, panic. They focus on the lack. They stare at the empty account and the unpaid bills, and they drown in fear, and that fear only blocks the very supply they need. But tonight you learn what the widow did, and what Florence did, to call supply out of the invisible and pay what seems impossible to pay. Here is the affirmation. Speak it with me. My supply is unlimited and comes from God. Every bill is paid under grace. My word is my wand. Say it again, and feel it as true even now. My supply is unlimited and comes from God. Every bill is paid under grace. My word is my wand. Feel that. You are no longer staring at the empty jar. You are looking to the endless source that fills it. And the moment you make that shift, the panic begins to loosen its grip. If you believe your bills can be paid under grace, type 2 words in the comments right now. They're paid. Just type "they're paid" and let it be your declaration of faith. Now let me give you the first key, which is understanding where your supply actually comes from. Because this is the foundation the entire miracle rests on. The widow made one crucial shift. She stopped looking at her empty situation and started looking at the source. When Elisha asked what she had, she first said nothing. That is how most people see their situation. Nothing, empty, hopeless. But then she remembered the little jar of oil. That small thing became the point of contact for the infinite. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your supply never truly comes from your job, your salary, your circumstances. Those are just channels. The real source is God, the infinite, an endless wellspring of abundance that has no limit and no shortage. And here is why this matters when you have no money. If you believe your supply comes only from your paycheck, then when the paycheck is not enough, you are trapped. There is nowhere else for money to come from, and you panic. But if you understand that your true supply is infinite and comes from a source beyond your visible circumstances, then a lack of money in your account is not the end of the story. It is simply an invitation for the infinite source to demonstrate through a channel you have not seen yet. The widow did not get her deliverance from her late husband's wages or from a job. It came from the multiplication of what she already had, through spiritual law. So the first shift is to take your eyes off the empty account and place them on the unlimited source. You stop saying there is no money, and you start knowing there is infinite supply, and it can reach me through any channel. And let me show you how completely this reverses the ordinary way of thinking. Because the world teaches you to look at your resources and then decide what is possible. You look at your bank balance, your income, your assets, and you conclude, this is what I have, therefore this is all that can happen. Your visible supply becomes a ceiling on your faith. But Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is exactly backward, that the visible is not the source, it is only the current form, and that the invisible source is infinite and can produce new forms, new channels, new money, out of what looks like nothing. The widow's oil did not come from her dead husband's estate. It did not come from a job. It did not come from any visible resource. It came from the multiplication of a tiny seed through spiritual law. And this is the key that unlocks provision. When there is no money, you must learn to look past the visible lack to the invisible supply. To know with certainty that just because you cannot see how the money will come, does not mean it cannot come. In fact, the how is not your concern at all. Your concern is to know the source, to trust the source, and to keep your eyes on the source rather than on the frightening emptiness of the visible. When you truly grasp that your supply is God, infinite and ever-present, the size of your bills stops being terrifying, because no bill is large compared to an infinite source. And the widow's oil is not the only place Scripture shows this. There is another moment, in the Gospel of Matthew, where a tax was owed, the temple tax, and there was no money on hand to pay it, and Jesus told Peter to go to the sea, cast a hook, and take the first fish that came up, and open its mouth, and inside he would find a coin, exactly enough to pay the tax for them both. Think about that. Money to pay what was owed, appearing from the most unexpected place imaginable. The mouth of a fish. Florence Scovel Shinn would point to this as another demonstration of the same law, that when there is a genuine need and genuine faith, the infinite supply can produce the exact provision required, through channels no human mind would ever predict. The money to pay the tax did not come from a purse or a paycheck. It came from the sea, through a fish, in a way that could only be called miraculous. And the lesson is the same. Do not limit the how. Your supply can reach you through the most unexpected channel. So you keep your eyes on the source and stay open to provision, arriving in ways you never imagined. from directions you would never have looked, because the infinite is not limited to the obvious channels. It can bring your good from the mouth of a fish, if that is what it takes. The second key is that you must use what you already have, however small, because the widow was not given the oil from nowhere. She already had it, a little jar, almost nothing, but it was the seed of her miracle. Elisha did not say, "Wait for oil to appear." He said, "What do you have? Use what is in your hand." And Florence Scovel Shinn taught this same principle powerfully. She taught that you must make a start with what you have, that you must not despise the day of small beginnings. The little you have is the point through which the infinite multiplies. Most people in financial trouble do the opposite. They freeze. They say, "I have so little, it is pointless." And they do nothing with the small amount they do have. They hoard it in fear, or they feel too ashamed of how little it is to even begin. But the law works through what you have, not through what you lack. The widow poured out her little oil. She put it into circulation. She acted, and in the acting, it multiplied. So when you have almost nothing, you ask, "What do I have?" And you use it. You bless the little money you have. You give thanks for it. You put it to work. You refuse to freeze in the feeling of not enough, because the little jar, blessed and poured out in faith, is exactly what the infinite uses to fill all the empty vessels of your need. And there is a deep spiritual reason why you must begin with the little you have, because using it is an act of faith, and faith is what sets the law in motion. When the widow poured out her only oil, she was risking her last resource on the word of the prophet. She was demonstrating trust with action. And it was that trust in action that opened the floodgates. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that you must give in order to receive, that you must set your supply in motion rather than freezing it in fear. She taught that money is like a current. It must flow, and hoarding it in terror actually stops the flow. This is why she often counseled people, even in lack, to give, to tithe, to bless their money as it went out, to keep it in circulation, because a frozen, clutched resource cannot multiply, but a resource poured out in faith becomes the seed of increase. So when you have very little, the instinct to clutch it, to freeze, to stop all flow, is the very thing that keeps you stuck. Instead, you bless what you have. You keep it moving. You use it wisely but without terror. You give even a little as a declaration that you trust your supply. And this flowing, faith-filled use of the little you have is what invites the multiplication. The seed must be planted to grow, and using what you have is how you plant it. The third key is that you must prepare for your supply before you see it. And this is one of the most powerful and overlooked parts of the story. Elisha told the widow to go and gather empty vessels, many of them, before a single drop of extra oil had appeared. Think about that. She had to go to her neighbors and collect jar after jar, empty containers, acting in complete faith that they would be filled. Before there was any evidence, the amount of oil she received was determined by how many empty vessels she prepared. If she had gathered only a few, she would have received only a little, but she gathered many, and the oil filled them all. Florence Scovel Shinn taught this exact principle. She called it making active preparation for the thing you have asked for, showing your faith through action before you see the result. She taught that you must act as though your good is already on the way, and this preparation is a powerful spiritual signal. It declares your absolute faith that the supply is coming. So when you need your bills paid, you do not just wish, you prepare as one who knows the money is coming. You make room for it. You act with the quiet confidence of someone whose supply is guaranteed. The empty vessels you prepare, your faith, your expectancy, your acting as if, determine how much can flow to you. Gather many vessels. Expect much, prepare for abundance, and much can come. And let me give you concrete ways to prepare your vessels, because this is not abstract. The empty vessels represent your expectancy made real through preparation. Florence Scovel Shinn gave a famous example of a woman who wanted a house, and Florence told her to start preparing for it, to act as though it were coming, to make room for it in her life and her mind. This active preparation is the gathering of vessels. So when you are believing for your bills to be paid, you prepare. You might make a list of exactly what you owe, and write beside it, paid under grace. You might set up the practical means to receive and handle the money that is coming. You might speak and act throughout your day as a person who knows their supply is on the way. Refusing to make decisions from panic, you might even, as Florence taught, give thanks in advance and make room, mentally and practically, for more than just barely enough. Every one of these is an empty vessel prepared, a declaration in action that says, I am ready to receive, I expect this to be filled, and remember the crucial lesson. The widow's supply was limited only by the vessels she prepared. So do not prepare timidly. Do not gather just 1 or 2 small jars of expectation. Gather many. Expect not just survival, but abundance. Prepare as though a flood of supply is coming, because the amount you are willing to prepare for and expect is the amount that can flow to you. And consider how much faith this preparation required of the widow. Imagine going to your neighbors, one after another, asking to borrow their empty jars and pots and containers, and when they ask why, having to say, because I am going to fill them with oil. When everyone knows you have only a single small jar to your name, it would have looked absurd. It would have taken real courage and real faith to gather many vessels with no visible way to fill them. And yet that very act of faith, that willingness to look foolish by preparing for an abundance not yet visible, was essential to the miracle. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this kind of active, even bold preparation is a powerful demonstration of faith that the universe responds to. She taught that you show your faith not by talking, but by acting as though your good is certain. So ask yourself, are you preparing for your supply, or are you sitting in doubt, waiting for proof before you will lift a finger? The widow, who gathered only 1 jar because she was afraid to look foolish, would have received only 1 jar of oil. It was the ones who dared to prepare abundantly, who received abundantly. So dare to prepare, dare to expect, dare to make room for more than seems reasonable, because your bold preparation is itself a magnet for your supply. The 4th key is that you must shut the door, which means you must do your spiritual work in private and protect it from doubt. Notice the specific instruction Elisha gave, go in and shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour. The miracle happened behind a shut door, away from the eyes of doubters. In private, Florence Scovel Shinn taught the importance of guarding your good, of not broadcasting your desires and demonstrations to people who would pour doubt and fear on them. She taught that you must go within, into the secret place, and do your believing there, protected from the negative words and skepticism of others. The shut door also means shutting out your own doubts and fears, closing the door on the voices that say it cannot happen, it is impossible, there is no way. When you are believing for your bills to be paid, you do not go around announcing it to everyone and inviting their doubt, and you do not let your own mind fill with fear. You shut the door, you go into that quiet inner place of faith, and there, in private, you pour out your faith and let the supply multiply. The door shut against doubt is the door open to the miracle. And this principle of the shut door is more important than most people realize, because doubt is contagious, and fear spreads when you are holding a fragile new faith that your impossible bills will be paid. The last thing you need is to expose that tender faith to people who will laugh, or worry, or tell you to be realistic. Florence Scovel Shinn was very clear that we must guard our words and guard our demonstrations. She taught that talking about your desires to the wrong people can dissipate the energy and invite the very doubt that blocks them. That is why the widow was told to shut the door. The miracle needed privacy. It needed to be protected from the atmosphere of doubt. So you learn to keep your own counsel. You do your believing in the secret place, as the scripture says. Pray to your Father in secret, and he who sees in secret shall reward you openly. You do not broadcast your faith project to everyone, and just as importantly, you shut the door on your own inner doubts. When the fearful thoughts come, and they will, it cannot happen, there is no way, you are being foolish. You do not entertain them, you shut the door. You return to the quiet inner knowing that your supply is coming. This inner sanctuary, protected from doubt within and without, is where the multiplication happens. Guard it fiercely. The fifth key is that the supply keeps flowing as long as there is a vessel to receive it. Because here is the profound detail. The oil did not stop flowing because the source ran dry. It stopped only when there were no more empty vessels. The widow said, "Bring me another vessel." And there was not one left. And then the oil stopped. The source was infinite. The only limit was the number of containers prepared to receive. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that God's supply is limitless, inexhaustible, that there is never any shortage on the divine side. The only limit is our own capacity to receive, our own faith, our own expectancy, our own openness. Most people unknowingly place tight limits on their supply. They ask for just barely enough. They cannot imagine abundance. They prepare only one or two small vessels of expectation, and so they receive only a little. But the truth is, the source would fill 1,000 vessels if you brought them. So you expand your capacity to receive. You dare to prepare more vessels, to expect not just barely enough to scrape by, but enough to pay every bill and have plenty left over, as the widow did. The supply is not the limit. Your willingness to receive is, so enlarge it. And this truth about capacity is genuinely life-changing when you absorb it, because it moves the whole question of your supply from out there to in here. Most people believe their supply is limited by external things, the economy, their job, their circumstances. But the widow's oil reveals that on the divine side, there is no limit at all. The source is infinite, inexhaustible, always flowing. The only variable in the entire equation is how much you are prepared and willing to receive. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that we are the ones who set the boundaries on our own good, through small thinking, through unworthiness, through an inability to imagine or accept abundance. She taught that people often pray for pennies when they could just as easily receive dollars, that they set their expectations at mere survival, when the infinite would gladly give them overflow. So the work becomes expanding your own capacity, daring to believe for more, stretching your imagination of what is possible, examining the hidden beliefs that make you feel you can only ever have just barely enough, and deliberately enlarging your vessels of expectation. When you truly grasp that the only limit is your own capacity to receive, you realize that you have been living far below your possible supply, not because the source was stingy, but because your vessels were too few and too small. So you begin, deliberately, to bring bigger vessels, to expect more, to make room for abundance, and as your capacity grows, so does what can flow to you. The sixth key is that you must act on your faith, moving from believing to doing, because the story does not end with the oil multiplying. The widow had to go and sell the oil and actually pay her debts. Faith became action. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that faith without works is dead, that you must act on your faith, take the practical steps, follow the intuitive leads, do the thing in front of you. The widow received the oil through a miracle, but she still had to take it to market, sell it, and settle her accounts. The demonstration was completed through her action. So when your supply begins to come, and it will, often through unexpected channels, you must act on it. You follow the hunch. You take the opportunity. You make the call. You do the practical thing that faith prompts you to do. You do not sit passively waiting for bills to pay themselves. You move, in faith, expecting your action to be met by divine supply. The combination of inner faith and outer action is what completes the miracle. You believe, you prepare, you pour, and then you go and do, and your bills, the ones that seemed impossible to pay, get paid, under grace, in ways you could not have predicted. And let me emphasize why this final step of action is so essential. Because there is a kind of false spirituality that believes if you just affirm and believe hard enough, you can sit passively and watch things fall into your lap without ever moving. But that is not what the widow did, and it is not what Florence Scovel Shinn taught. The widow had to physically gather the vessels, physically pour the oil, physically go to the market, physically sell it, and physically pay her creditors. Her faith was completed through a chain of actions. Florence taught that faith and works go together, that you demonstrate your faith by acting on it, and that intuition, the still small voice, will often guide you to the specific practical steps to take. She taught people to follow their hunches, to act on the leads that came, because those leads were divine guidance pointing toward the channel of their supply. So when you are believing for your provision, you stay alert and active. You follow the nudge to make a certain call, to look into a certain opportunity, to offer a certain service, to take a certain practical step. You treat these intuitive leads as sacred, because they are often the very hands through which your supply arrives. You do not despise the practical. You sanctify it. You act, expecting your action to be met and multiplied by the infinite source. Faith moves your feet, and as you move in faith, the supply meets you, and the impossible bill is paid. Here is the whole picture. There is a secret to paying your bills when you have no money, and it is written in the story of the widow's oil. Your supply does not come from your visible circumstances, but from an infinite source. You begin with the little you already have. You prepare for your supply before you see it, by gathering many vessels of faith and expectancy. You shut the door against doubt and do your believing in private. You understand that the supply is limitless, and only your capacity to receive sets the limit. And you act on your faith, moving from believing to doing. When you live this way, the empty jar becomes an overflowing supply, and the debts that once terrified you are paid. Be plenty left over. Just as they were for the widow, every part of this is available to you starting tonight. The formula has been shown to you, right out of Scripture, and the only thing required is that you use it. And let me leave you with one final thought about why this matters so deeply. Because the fear of not being able to pay your bills is one of the most crushing weights a human being can carry. It steals your sleep. It poisons your days. It makes you feel like a failure, like you are drowning with no one to help. And Florence Scovel Shinn understood this suffering. She worked with countless people in exactly this kind of desperation, and she watched this law lift them out of it again and again. The point of the widow's oil is not just that bills got paid. It is that a woman in total hopelessness discovered that she was never actually alone, never actually without supply, that behind the visible emptiness stood an infinite source that responded to her faith. This is the deeper gift. To know that no matter how empty the jar looks, the source is always there, always infinite, always ready to flow the moment you turn to it in faith, instead of drowning in fear. So if you are in that place tonight, staring at bills you do not know how to pay, take heart. You are the widow with the little jar of oil, and the same God who multiplied hers is ready to multiply yours. Turn from the empty account to the infinite source. Do the inner work. Prepare your vessels. Act in faith, and watch what has always been impossible become possible. Before we close, let me be direct with you one final time. The reason most people never experience this kind of miraculous provision is that they cannot hold the faith on their own. When the bills are piling up and the fear is loud, they slip back into panic and lack, and the door of doubt slams shut on their supply. This is exactly why I created the Overflow Covenant, a 21-day sequence where one short decree rooted in these truths lands in your inbox every single morning, to keep you in the consciousness of unlimited supply, to keep the door shut against doubt and open to the miracle, day after day, until provision becomes your natural state. It is $27, one payment, 30-day full refund. The link is in the description. Begin it tonight, and let the first decree reach you in the morning. So speak the affirmation with me one final time before you go. My supply is unlimited and comes from God. Every bill is paid under grace. My word is my wand. Hold that, and from this moment on, stop staring at the empty jar and start looking to the infinite source that fills every vessel you bring to it.